Hi, everybody. In my bed right now, getting ready to read to you The Night of the Spadefoot Toads, chapters 17 and 18. And I'm super excited to end this book with you guys. It's been a really good book, and I think we've really enjoyed reading it. And I want to do these chapters justice and not be tired while I read them 3 times tomorrow. So I thought I would go ahead tonight and read them on YouTube, and then you could listen to them tomorrow. Plus, we have a few kids in quarantine, so they can listen to it as well. And after we listen to this, we're actually not going to discuss it until Wednesday in class, and we're going to do a little activity with it. So just kind of keep it up here, and then you're actually having an earpod lesson to do after this, and then I'll hand out your homework and everything for tomorrow. So just kind of let's go through the chapter and just enjoy the end of the book and what I consider a little bit of a twist. So here we go. So if you'll join me on pages, you probably are already there because I know you guys, page 191. When Ben gets home, he grabs a snack and is about to head back outside when his mother calls out, "There's something for you in your room." He runs down the hall and finds a big box sitting on his bedroom floor. Its corners are squashed, and Ben recognizes his own handwriting on the side. Ben's room. "Finally," he says to himself. He drops his backpack, rips the tape off the box, and pulls back on the flaps. His mom comes in and leans against the door, watching him. His first thought, when he looks at the box, is that there's not as much stuff as he remembered. What's missing? He pulls out the little pill bottles holding insects, the plastic food container that holds the snakeskin, the posters of desert animals he folded so carefully when he packed in Tucson, and finally, down at the bottom, the books and his collection of rocks. "Happy?" his mother asks. "Yeah," Ben says. His mother smiles and leaves the room. Ben looks through the stuff again. It's all there, but it feels like something is missing. It's not as exciting or comforting as he thought it would be. All of the things in the box seem like parts of his life from so long ago. Some other time, some other place. He's glad he got the box back, but it doesn't seem so important now. He puts the stuff back in the box and runs to the kitchen. His mom is busy with something on the other side of the room, so Ben grabs a handful of cookies and heads outside. He thinks about going by the trail, but decides his bike will be faster. He wants to get to Mrs. Tibbets's house before anyone else does. But by the time he gets there, the driveway is filled with cars. Mrs. Tibbets's old station wagon sits next to her sister-in-law's car. Parked behind them are a bright green van with the name of a real estate company on the side, and a blue car with state insignia on the door. Ben's heart races. He knocks on the front door. When nobody answers, he walks around to the back and finds 4 people standing in a semicircle, looking at the back field. Sandwiched between Mrs. Tibbets and her sister-in-law are a tall lady in a business suit with a purse slung over her shoulder and a short, stocky man in a brown windbreaker, an ancient green baseball cap, and hiking boots. He's holding a clipboard under one arm. No one's talking. They're just standing there looking like they'd rather be somewhere else. They all turn when they hear Ben come up. "Hello, Ben," says Mrs. Tibbets. "Hi," Ben says back. "This is Tabitha Turner, my sister-in-law, and this is Adelia Garrett, her real estate agent, and this—" "You must be the young man who calls," says the man in the green cap. His face breaks into a grin. "I'm Hank Lindsay," he says, holding out his hand. Ben's dad has always told him you can tell a lot from someone's handshake, and Ben likes the friendly way Hank Lindsay shakes his hand. "Hi, Mr. Lindsay." The real estate agent looks at Ben and Mr. Lindsay like she thinks they don't belong here. But Ben isn't leaving, not now. Then Mrs. Tibbets' sister-in-law speaks up. "Excuse me, but I'm still mystified as to why this boy felt free to invite a person from the state onto my property." "I spoke with Mr. Lindsay too, Tabitha," Mrs. Tibbets says. "I told him he should come." Tabitha Turner sniffs and shakes her head. Well, says Mrs. Garrett, this is certainly a beautiful piece of property. It has terrific possibilities. She gives Hank Lindsay a tight little smile. There's an awkward moment of silence, and Ben is glad he doesn't have to do anything but stand there and be a kid. Well, Mr. Lindsay says, taking out his clipboard, let's give it a look. It's over here, says Mrs. Tibbets. The pool is down the path on the other side of the garage. She leads the way, and everyone follows behind her in a straggling line. What's in there? What was in there? Mr. Lindsay asks, nodding to the empty cages beside the garage. Whew, sorry, guys, it's been a long day. Snakes, said Mrs. Tibbets, hurrying towards the trailhead. My husband was a herpetologist. I know, Mr. Lindsay says. I met him several times. He knew his stuff. Tabitha shakes her head and mumbles something to Mrs. Garrett as they try to keep up with the others. Swallows swoop overhead, and a mockingbird calls from the branches of a tree in the back field. This is an interesting piece of land, Mr. Lindsay says. There are several different habitats. There's that meadow behind the house, and it looks like there's an outcropping of granite over there. And a vernal pool, Ben says hopefully. The real estate agent swats the gnats flying around her head. As they enter the woods, the canopy of leaves above them casts splotchy shadows on the forest floor. It's a little wet back here, Mr. Lindsay says. I don't know if you could build on this part. It's always wetter in the spring, the real estate agent says, treading carefully to avoid getting mud on her shiny shoes. It takes a while for this odd mix of hikers to get through the woods. Mr. Lindsay, Ben, and Mrs. Tibbets stop several times on the path, so the other two women can catch up. When they near the vernal pool, Ben runs ahead. It's almost like he wants to warn the pool that people are coming. But when he gets to the big rock, he stops and stares. There's no pool there. He can't believe it. It has completely dried up. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never believe there was a pool here only a few days ago. Now it's just a little dip in the ground surrounded by rocks and trees, their leaves casting a deep shadow where the pool had been. Small yellow-green bunches of leaves are shooting up from the spot. Ben hears the others approaching and turns to face them. This is the pool, he says, hoping Mr. Lindsay can see something there, or something that isn't there. This is where the Spadefoot comes. But there's nothing here, exclaims Mrs. Garrett. Not even a puddle. But it was here, Ben says. It's been here every year for thousands of years. Oh, really, says the real estate agent. Mr. Lindsay squats and looks at the site. They all watch him. He scratches the back of his head, then pushes aside the plants growing up out of the dark, rotting leaves. He presses a finger into the damp earth. It's like a doctor examining a patient. What do you think? Ben asks. Mr. Lindsay stands up and looks around with his hands on his hips. He steps back several yards, then walks in a circle, checking the ground several times. He scribbles something in the notebook attached to his clipboard. Well, it could be a significant site, he finally says. It's a vernal pool for sure. But there's nothing here, Mrs. Garrett insists. Surely you can't say this is a significant site when there's no sign of a pond here. Well, yes, ma'am, there are signs. I can tell it's a vernal pool. Ben smiles and glances over at Mrs. Tibbets. Her eyes are on the place where the pool once was. But everyone turns to look at Mr. Lindsay. There are two problems. First, we'd have to document it that it contains threatened or endangered species that need vernal pools to survive. We saw the Spadefoots, Ben practically shouts. Mrs. Tibbets has seen them for years. Right, says Mr. Lindsay, but we need proof. Pictures or something. It wouldn't have to be Spadefoot toads. There are other vernal pool species. Fairy shrimp, fingernail clams, and caddisfly larvae, for example. But everything has to be well documented before we can stop any development. Just what I've said all along, says Mrs. Garrett. You can't hold us up from selling something without proof. I've got a buyer and an owner who is ready to sell. End of story. But Mr. Lindsay, Ben begs, can't you just hold off the builders until we can get the proof? Excuse me, young man, Mrs. Turner says, really stewing now. Will you please stay out of this? You have no say here. I'm sorry, guys. I just lost my spot. There we go. Leave him be, Tabitha, Mrs. Tibbets snaps. Everybody shuts up and stares at her. Then let Mr. Lindsay talk. Mr. Lindsay takes off his cap, smooths back his thinning hair, and replaces the cap on his head. There are other problems. In order to be certified as a vernal pool, the site would have to be filled with water for at least 2 months. And I'm not sure this pool will be big enough to qualify. But that's not fair, Ben blurts out. The Spadefoots don't care how big it is. They need it to live. Gloria, Mrs. Turner says to her sister-in-law, glaring at Ben like he's a dog that needs to be disciplined. Can't you do something about the boy? He's right, Mr. Lindsay said. It's not fair, but it's the way the laws are written. There are Spadefoot toads here, Mrs. Tibbets says. And they are endangered, Ben adds. I know. Mr. Lindsay tucks his clipboard back under his arm. It's a weird little loophole in the law. Spadefoots are particularly difficult to document since they don't need a very big pool. So, the real estate agent says, it's not really a problem. Mr. Lindsay looks at her and sighs. Unless you're a Spadefoot. Ben feels tears welling up in his eyes. He can't believe there's nothing anyone can do. Without another word, the adults turn and head back towards the house. Ben falls in beside Mrs. Tibbets, and she places her hand on his shoulder. It's a long, quiet walk. When they reach Mrs. Tibbets' yard, they all stand in the driveway. Mrs. Garrett breaks the silence. So, Mr. Lindsay, things have not really changed in terms of what can happen to the land. There's nothing to prevent its sale. No, Mr. Lindsay hesitates, but you know, if there was a real concern about preserving an endangered habitat, it's possible that the sale could have been made to a group that would protect it. The Nature Conservancy or the Land Trust in the town might buy the land. They would pay you and then not develop it. But it's not at full value, the real estate agent says. Development is really the way to get the most out of a piece of property. Selling it to some nature group wouldn't be nearly as profitable. Not as profitable as putting up a bunch of houses, no. He looks over at Mrs. Turner. But I'm sure they would offer a fair price. It's a special piece of land, even if the state can't protect it. Mrs. Tibbets keeps her eyes on her sister-in-law. Mrs. Turner stares down the driveway pavement with a straight mouth, arms folded across her chest. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay, she says. We appreciate your time. Mrs. Tibbets blows a short, exasperated burst of air out of her mouth. Her sister-in-law frowns. Selling the land helps you too, Gloria. Don't make me the bad guy. It's silent again. Mr. Lindsay takes his wallet out of his pocket and pulls out a card. He hands it to Mrs. Turner. She looks at the card like it's poison, but she takes it. If you have any questions or concerns, he says, give me a call. He shakes hands all around and comes to Ben last. It's a pleasure to meet you, young man. Ben smiles weakly and shakes his hand, but he's hugely disappointed in this man who should have been able to make things right. As Mr. Lindsay drives away, Mrs. Turner and the real estate woman stand by the van talking quietly. I'm going inside, Tabitha, Mrs. Tibbets calls. We'll talk later, her sister-in-law answers. Ben and Mrs. Tibbets watch as the car and the real estate van pull out of the driveway. Want a cookie? Mrs. Tibbets asks, putting a hand on Ben's shoulder. Okay, Ben says. Ben sits at the kitchen table where he sat a half dozen times before. The late afternoon sun shines through the window into Mrs. Tibbets' hands, resting on the table just across from him. It's over, Ben thinks. All of this, and nothing happens. The houses get built. The Spadefoots lose their home. Isn't there anything you can say to your sister-in-law? He asks. Mrs. Tibbets shakes her head. There's not a thing I can do. We're just too far apart. And she wouldn't listen to me, no matter what I said. But Mr. Lindsay said she could still make money, even if she sold the land to people who would take care of it. I know, but she's got her mind made up. They have a buyer who's willing to pay a lot of money. I can't imagine what would make her change her mind. Ben looks out the window and tries to picture the trees gone and the land filled up with houses. Your husband wouldn't have sold the land so someone could build houses on it, would he? No, he loved this land. Doesn't she love it too? You'd think so. She grew up on it. I tried reminding her of that, but she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't listen to anything I say. Some of Mrs. Tibbets's words catch Ben's attention. She grew up on it. An idea hits him. Mrs. Tibbets, where are those pictures? What pictures? You know, those old pictures you were going through a couple of weeks ago. Where are they? On the dining room table. And jumps up and runs to the dining room. He brings the box back to the kitchen and dumps the contents onto the table. Mrs. Tibbets watches him without speaking as he searches through the yellowed old photographs. He finds the snapshot he's looking for and holds it up in the fading daylight. It's the picture of the two kids sitting on the rock. Suddenly he realizes that that's the rock he and Mrs. Tibbets sat on by the vernal pool. He gazes at the picture, watching the years fall away. The girl is Tabitha, and the boy is Thomas. They're both holding American toads. The girl has a big grin and doesn't look anything like the grown-up Mrs. Tabitha Turner. And flips over the photo. Scrawled on the back are these three words: Tom, me, and the overtoad. He turns over the picture again and looks at the girl holding the toad. The overtoad. Tabitha and the overtoad. Mrs. Tibbets, this is Tabitha, isn't it? Mrs. Tibbets takes the photo and holds it at arm's length. Yes, she says, squinting. It's Tabitha and Thomas. Look at what she wrote on the back. She knows about the overtoad. You mean she knew about it when she was little? But she forgot, Ben says. Yes, she forgot. Things happen when you grow up, and you forget. Mrs. Tibbets gets up to put the dishes in the sink, and Ben slips the photo into his jacket pocket. I have to go now, he says. I need to get to work on my geography report. Mrs. Tibbets dries her hands on a dish towel. Your report? I thought it was due today. It was, but Mrs. Kutcher gave me another week. I changed what I'm doing it on. If I don't finish it this time, she'll kill me. I doubt that. Well, bye, Ben says, and scoots out the back door. There's so much to do, and he doesn't know if he has enough time. But he whirls around and sticks his head back through the doorway. Mrs. Tibbets, maybe the overtoad will save us. I would love that, Mrs. Tibbets says. 2 days later, on a hot Sunday afternoon, Ben leads Ryan and Jenny down the path from his house. They're all carrying supplies for the expedition, and Jenny's got her camera slung around her neck. Ryan drops the plastic containers he's carrying, and they skitter across the trail. Ben and Jenny help him pick them up. It's good your body parts are attached, Jenny says, or you'd lose them too. Ryan laughs. Like you never lose anything. You're so perfect. Jenny smiles. Ben slows down to check his pocket. Did he forget the list of things to search for at the site of the vernal pool? No, it's still there, along with the picture he printed from the internet. Eggs from fairy shrimp, caddisfly cases, snail shells, fingernail clams. Nothing they're looking for is longer than 2 inches, but Ben hopes he can find some specimens to show what lives in a vernal pool. He wants to show everything he can in his report. When they get to the side of the pool, Ben stops. Here it is, he says. Ryan and Jenny stare at the mud-encrusted, leaf-strewn ground. I don't see any pool, says Ryan. I told you. That's what a vernal pool does, said Ben. It dries up. But there's nothing left to find, Ryan says. There's got to be something. Help me look. And Jenny, will you take some pictures of the area? Ben steps carefully out of the middle of the darkened leaves where the pool was and squats down. Ryan starts shoving leaves and dirt aside. I don't see anything, he says. Hey, Ben yells, you've got to be more careful. We don't want to mess everything up. While Jenny snaps pictures, Ryan and Ben work quietly and methodically, sifting through the mud. First, Ben finds a caddisfly casing. Then Ryan shouts, Hey, look, a little clamshell, and here's another one. I know, Ben says. It's like there's nothing there, but then you look closely and bam, a whole different world opens up. Within 15 minutes, they fill a couple of containers with snails, clams, and caddisfly shells. Too bad we can't get a spadefoot, says Ryan. They're around here somewhere, says Ben, but they're impossible to find. Just then, something moves in the leaves by his feet. He bends over and pushes the leaves aside, then gently places his hand over the creature and picks it up. Is it a spadefoot? Ryan asks. Nope, Ben says. It's a wood frog. Remember the one I brought into school? They use vernal pools too. He opens up his hand carefully. Look at it. The three of them peer down at its tan, smooth skin and the dark masks around its eyes. It's cool, Ryan says. Ben looks at the frog. Then he looks at Jenny and Ryan. An idea comes into his head. A great idea. You guys, go sit on that rock over there, Ben says, pointing to the boulder by the side of the pool. How come? Ryan asks. Just do it, please. Jenny shakes her head, but she follows Ryan to the rock and clambers up behind him. Jenny, can I use your camera? Ben asks. He takes the camera from her and puts the strap around his neck. One more thing, he says, handing the frog to Jenny. You have to hold this. Hold it up so I can see it. No way. What if it poops on me? Consider yourself blessed. Just take it. I'll hurry. They're laughing as Ben focuses the camera on them. Okay, he says. Jenny, hold up the frog a little higher. Both of you guys smile. Ribbit, Ryan says. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Ben clicks the picture. Ben works like crazy on the report. For the next 5 days, it's all he thinks about. The best part about the report is what it feels like when it's finished. It's like Ben hasn't taken a deep breath for weeks, and suddenly his lungs are filled with fresh air. Or like he's taken off a pair of really dark sunglasses and can finally see clearly again. And when he's finished, he knows it's good. He just hopes it's good enough. It's raining, but by the time Ben finds the street he's looking for, it has started to pour. He's drenched, but his report is inside his jacket, safely tucked into a plastic bag. He pedals his bike slowly so he can see the street numbers. Then he recognizes the car in one of the driveways. Ben parks his bike on the sidewalk, walks to the door, and knocks. Nobody answers, so he knocks again. He's about to give up when the door opens. Tabitha Turner stands there looking surprised. Yes? Hello, Mrs. Turner. I'm Ben Maroney. Drops of rain trickle from his hair and slide down his nose. He wipes his face with the sleeve of his jacket. I met you at Mrs. Tibbets's house. I knew who you are. I'm really sorry to bother you, but I've got something I want to show you. It's my report for geography. She raises one eyebrow. Geography? Yes, ma'am, geography. It'll just take a minute, please. Tabitha Turner looks back in the house like she's trying to figure out a way to escape, but she steps to the other side and motions for Ben to come in. You can hang your wet jacket on that coat rack, she tells him, and maybe you'd better leave your shoes by the door. Ben does as he's told and follows Mrs. Turner into a large living room. She sits in a straight-back chair by the window. Ben checks the seat of his jeans to make sure it isn't wet, then perches on the edge of the couch. With his heart pounding, he slides his report out of the plastic bag and places it on the coffee table. I wanted to show you my report on ecosystems, he says, scooting it over to where she can see it. She glances down at the report, then looks at him blankly, like she's still trying to figure out what he's talking about. Um, I was going to do it on the desert because that's where I lived until 4 months ago. I really loved it there. There was a great museum near my house, and I had all this stuff about the deserts. I even had a lizard. Its name was Lenny, but I didn't get to bring it here with me when I moved. My friend Toby was keeping it, and it died. Mrs. Turner nods, waiting to hear what this is all about. But when I started my desert report, I didn't feel like doing it anymore. Ben is halfway afraid to go on, but there's nothing to do but just plow ahead. So instead, I decided to do it about what it's like where I live now. He takes a deep breath and lets it out. I decided to do it about your land, about your vernal pool. Tabitha Turner clears her throat and shifts uncomfortably in her chair, as if she's about to speak, but Ben doesn't give her the chance to interrupt. He opens his report and holds it out to her. I know you don't have time to read all of this, but here I talk about the pool, about how the pool has been there a really long time, probably for 10,000 years, and about the people who have lived there. The Wampanoag Indians walked through here maybe 1,000 years ago. They were the ones who met the Pilgrims. Ben thumbs through it until he finds the photos. See, here are some of the animals that live in the vernal pools. These are salamanders, spotted ones, I'm pretty sure. We didn't find any in your pool, but they live around here. And look at this caddisfly larvae. They make these little buildings out of sticks. He holds up the booklet so she can see the little clam shells he taped to the sheet. I found these at the pool site, and I figured there were fairy shrimp too, but I couldn't find any. I know Spadefoots were there earlier this spring, but they're all spread out now. Still, me and my friends did find something interesting. Ben flips to the last page where he's taped the picture of Ryan and Jenny sitting on the big rock by the dried up pool. They're both laughing, and Jenny's nose is scrunched up. She's holding the wood frog away from her because she's afraid it's going to poop on her. Ben has barely looked at Mrs. Turner the whole time, but now he sneaks a glance. She's studying the picture of Ryan and Jenny. There is the barest hint of a smile on her face. He wonders if she knows. He's about to find out. He barrels ahead with what he's been planning to say. What could happen here is more important than any grade he's going to get in geography. And I put that picture at the end of the report because of the picture I put at the front of it. Ben flips back to the first page of the report and holds it up for Tabitha Turner to see. The picture is old and crinkled on the edges. It shows two kids sitting on a rock holding toads. The girl is holding the fat toad under her chin and laughing. Tabitha Turner's breath catches. Ben looks up at her and sees her hand go to her mouth. But he's not done. Let me read the first page, he says. Ben reads aloud over the sound of his heart pounding in his chest. There's a habitat close to me that I just discovered. It's like another planet. Even though it's small, it holds thousands of things. And once there were these two kids who lived near it. They were brother and sister. They made up a funny story about a giant spirit that looked over the land. They called the creature the Overtoad. This is the story of the land and water that the Overtoad protects. It has protected it for thousands of years, and I hope it protects it for thousands more. My report is about a vernal pool in Edinburgh, Massachusetts. Ben watches as Tabitha Turner takes her hand from her mouth and reaches out for the report. He hands it to her. After staring at the picture for a moment, she looks at the ceiling like she's trying to see right through it to the sky, then closes the report. She opens it again and leaves through the booklet page by page. When she gets to the picture of Ryan and Jenny, she stares at it, then flips back to the picture of her and her brother. Mrs. Turner, Ben pleads. Please don't let them put up houses where the toads are. I know it's your land, but please don't do it. Mrs. Tibbets doesn't want you to either, but she thinks you're mad at her. I know you don't get along. She says you won't listen to her. Tabitha Turner gives him a sad smile. I know what my sister-in-law thinks, she says. She pauses for a moment, then asks, Does she know you're doing this? Ben shakes his head. She thinks it's too late. I was hoping you might sell it to somebody who won't put houses on it, but she says you won't change your mind. He looks at Tabitha Turner. Her face shows nothing. Suddenly, Ben is exhausted. He never should have done this. Mrs. Tibbets was right. Mrs. Turner stands, the report still in her hands. I'll need that back, Ben says. Well, what will you do with the picture, she asks, handing him back the booklet. I'll give it back to Mrs. Tibbets. If it's all right, I'd like it, Tabitha Turner says. Okay, Ben says. When I get the report back, I'll ask her if I can give it to you. Actually, she adds, I'd like both of them. The other one, too. Sure, Ben says. Okay. Mrs. Turner leads him to the front door and opens it. Thank you for coming by, Ben, she says. Okay, Ben says. If you want, you don't need to say anything more, she says. Thank you for coming by. Ben climbs on his bike for the long ride home. When he looks back, Mrs. Turner is standing behind the storm door watching him. He feels empty. It's all up to the Overtoad now. The next day, when Ben sees his terrarium and his report on the big table at the back of the classroom, a bunch of kids gather around it. What's in there? Someone asks. Wetland plants, Ben says. Any snakes? Danny Martin asks. Ben shakes his head. Toads? Someone else asks. Frogs? There's an American toad in there, Ben says. I can't see it, Danny says. It's camouflaged, Ben says. It doesn't want you to see it. Let's take it out, another kid says. I think we should leave it alone, Ben says. It's already freaked out about where it is. I'm going to take it back to the woods tomorrow. Why don't you keep it? Tommy Miller asks. I don't feel like it, Ben says. His classmates try to find the toad in the terrarium, but lose interest after a while and drift back to their desks. That's when Ben notices Jenny leafing through his report. Geez, Ben, this is really long, she says. I know, Ben says. I kind of got carried away. Ryan appears at Jenny's side. Let me see, he says, and grabs for it. Whoa, it's like 1,000,000 pages. 15, actually, Jenny says. Almost 1,000,000, Ryan says, flipping the pages. Don't mess it up, says Ben, or I'll feed you to the Overtoad. As he said that, Mrs. Kutcher comes up behind Ben. Did you bring this in, Ben? She says, looking down at the terrarium. Yeah, he says. It's part of my report. He takes the report out of Ryan's hands and gives it to Mrs. Kutcher. She thumbs through it, and a huge smile spreads across her face. Great work, Ben. Great, great work. Ben grins, and it is great work, and he knows it. Okay, guys, so that was only chapter 17, and we still have chapter 18, but it's just a few pages, this one, so bear with me. I know this is a long time sitting and listening. Chapter 18. After school on Wednesday, Ben's heading into the kitchen for his snack when the phone rings. He grabs the receiver before his sister can get there. No fair, she says. You always get it first. He holds his hand over the mouthpiece for a second. So, life's not fair. I hate it when you say that, Agatha shouts. She dashes out the back door and slams it behind her. Ben turns back to the phone. Someone is chuckling. Ben, a voice says. Yes. It's Mrs. Tibbets. Is your mother there? I'd like to speak to her. Ben hesitates. Okay. It's nothing bad, Ben. I just need to talk with her for a minute. Ben hands the receiver to his mom, who says hi to Mrs. Tibbets. He doesn't know what to make of it. After a minute of listening, she starts laughing. I see, she says, looking over at Ben. All right. She hangs up and announces, Mrs. Tibbets is picking you up in about 15 minutes. For what? She'll tell you. But, Mom, I'm sorry, you'll just have to wait. Ben tries to wheedle it out of her, but when he sees it's no use, he goes outside to wait. A long half-hour later, Mrs. Tibbets' station wagon pulls into the driveway. She leans over and opens the door. Hi, Ben says as he hops in. Hello, Ben. Mrs. Tibbets backs out of the driveway and heads down the street. Ben waits for her to say something, but she keeps her eyes on the road and her mouth shut. Where are we going? He finally asks. To my house, she says. When they round the last corner, Ben sees Tabitha Turner standing beside her car in the driveway. Someone Ben hasn't seen before is next to her. "Hello, Ben," Mrs. Turner says as he and Mrs. Tibbets get out of the car. "Hi," he says. He looks from person to person, trying to get a sense of what this is all about. "I asked Gloria if she thought you'd like to come over. We've just been talking to Mr. Selby here. He's with the local land trust." Ben opens his mouth, then closes it again. No one says anything for a minute. They're all looking at each other, trying to figure out who should speak first. "I've decided to sell most of the property to the land trust," Tabitha finally says. "I'm holding on to a 2-acre plot on the other side of the vernal pool, where we may put up a few houses." Ben nods, still too stunned to speak. "The Spadefoots will be all right. I thought you should know." Ben looks at Mrs. Tibbets, then back at Mrs. Turner. "You changed your mind?" Ben says. Mrs. Turner nods her head. "Yes, someone made me change my mind." Ben's face breaks into a huge grin. "That's great! That's really great!" he says. "Thanks! Thank you so much!" "You're welcome," Mrs. Turner says. "No, I mean really thanks." "And I mean you're really welcome." Mrs. Turner gets in her car, starts the motor, then rolls down the window. "One more thing, Ben. If you see the overtoad, thank her for me." "Okay," says Ben. "Maybe someone should name the trail by the pool the Overtoad Trail," Mrs. Tibbets says. Mrs. Turner looks at her sister-in-law and manages a smile. "That's a good idea," she says. The land trust man shakes Mrs. Tibbets' hand and gets in the passenger side of Mrs. Turner's car. Ben and Mrs. Tibbets wave as the car pulls away. Without a word, they speak the same silent language. Mrs. Tibbets and Ben walk around the garage and head towards the woods. Ben feels his feet connect with the ground like he's a part of it and it's a part of him. As they enter the trees, a breeze pushes the branches back and forth, showing the silvery undersides of the leaves. They come closer and closer to the place where the vernal pool was and will be again. Suddenly, Mrs. Tibbets draws in a breath and stops. "Oh my gosh," she whispers, holding out an arm in front of Ben. "What is it?" he whispers. "Look! Just look!" She points to the path ahead. Ben looks where she's pointing, and the hair raises on his arms. It's a rattlesnake crossing the path about 10 feet in front of them, sliding quietly over the dirt and the leaves. Another one follows it. Ben and Mrs. Tibbets watch them until they disappear into the undergrowth. "I don't believe it," Mrs. Tibbets murmurs. "I just don't believe it." They both stand there for a moment, barely breathing. They're surrounded by the small sounds of the woods. Far off in the distance, they can hear a car motor. Finally, Mrs. Tibbets breaks the silence. "Well," she says, "I guess we're just going to have to be a little more careful around here from now on. It seems we have some new neighbors." "I hope they feel at home," Ben says. "I hope you do too, Ben," Mrs. Tibbets says. "I do," he says, and he does, right at home. The end. Oh, guys, I hope you loved the end as much as I do, and I'm sure we'll talk about it at the end of class, but what a beautiful story. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss some things from these last 2 chapters, and we're going to talk about theme, and then on Thursday, I'll explain our big, fun project at the end of this book. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, guys.